putting in a shift, as they say.
I'm just feeling.
No problem. No problem. As long as Arthur can hear me, there's no problem. Thanks, mate. So, all right, Kev, do you want to teach us? Let's keep.
Sure. Okay, so continuing with the introduction, but the halachas in this introduction. This is for the Cholim of Klal Yisrael for speed for Shlema. Okay, so continuing with if someone incurs a loss or potential loss. So the example here is if a Shabbos tablecloth catches fire, a person might get so thrown by the sudden prospect of financial loss that he might extinguish the fire himself, even though he knows it's forbidden. The reason he might do this is that because he doesn't know the permitted way of extinguishing a fire on Shabbos. If he had studied the laws of Shabbos, he would have known that the permitted way of extinguishing a fire, that is to pour water around the fire to prevent it from spreading, or alternatively, calling a non-Jew to extinguish it. Okay. Now, one more here, and we can... the prohibition of borer, which is known as separating, or selecting actually, is often violated due to ignorance. For example, if a person has a mixture of different kinds of poultry, and he sets apart one kind for later use, he violates an absolute prohibition as discussed by the Poiskin. Indeed, he should take whatever kind of meat he wants to eat now, leaving the other meat behind for later. Similarly, skimming cream off the top of milk is also a violation of borer. Rather, one must leave some of the cream behind together with the milk. Alternatively, he should take some of the milk with the cream. There are many, many more relevant examples of borer. Okay, let's leave it at that.
Okay. Just before I thought for tomorrow, because I did learn it this afternoon. And, well, this evening, basically, I had a swim and then I learned the Gemara again. I learned it on Shabbos.
You look relaxed.
And I decided to just relax outside on a towel to watch the sunset because I wasn't feeling well. What happened, just quickly for a minute, is at 3 o'clock in the morning, the alarm goes off and there's a guy at my window with a torch. Now, it took me a second or two eventually to realize it was the CSO oak in the alarm. Now, what happened is I went from that position to looking for some sort of weapon because they broke in my place once before. So you hear an alarm and you see some guy at your window with a torch trying to work his way in. And by the time I fell back asleep, it was 5:30 in the morning.
Jesus.
Because what happens is when you take a sleeping tablet, it helps you fall asleep. Then Dominoc keeps you asleep. And once you wake up, it's really difficult if you have sleeping conditions to go back because you get bitten by mosquitoes, your back's not comfortable, your legs get irritated, you keep tossing and turning, your heart is still palpitating, then you need the loo, and it wrecks you for the whole day. It really, really does. So, we're all not feeling well. There's, apart from this Omicron, there are viruses going around that are like superbugs that can knock you off your feet for weeks. It doesn't have to be the Omicron. It can be, there's a million of things. So I'm sure we're all not feeling 100%. There are things in Israel, things in South Africa. And that if you've got, as you turn in your 50s or whatever, you don't recover like in your 20s. When you're in your 20s, you can party all night and you're fine the next day. It doesn't work like that when you get older. It actually starts to knock you a bit. And then you have a few. Shabbos is good for a reboot. So guys, I'm not going to tax you. This is going to be fun. You're going to learn a bit. And I'm just going to go through a bit of a pace.
You're not going to charge us VAT then?
The government's going to put up VAT.
You're not going to tax us?
No, we're being taxed enough. Don't worry.
And you can keep yourself hydrated by having some government juice.
Okay. So guys, let's just quickly go through a fast. super repetition. On Saturday night, you guys were very kind to me, and you were all exhausted, and I'm sorry. So let's just do this very quickly. Is that the text itself stated, if you remember, in the 65th daf, in the beginning, that Rav said, the thief pays the principal according to the value of the stolen article when he stole it. And he pays the twofold payment, the fourfold and the fivefold payment, according to the value of the stolen article at the time that he's sued in court. Okay? So the Torah states that the thief pays twice the value of the article that he stole. I'm talking about inanimate objects now, not for a sheep or an ox. Once for the article itself, as restitution, which is the principal amount, right? And then the second equivalent amount as a fine. So Rav is teaching that basically in the event that the article underwent a change in value between the time that it was stolen and the time that the thief was sued in court, he basically pays the principal payment according to the article's value at the time of the theft. Okay? The second payment, the kefil, which is actually a knas, a penalty, whether it would be that would be the article's value at the time he's sued in court. So again, principal is paid at the time of the theft. The second payment, the kefil, according to the article's value at the time he's sued in court. So if we took, for example, a Chardonnay, okay, and it's worth 4 zuzim, and the value of that Chardonnay, for example, decreases to 1 zuz. There's a glut in the market where you could only get Chardonnay imported from California. It was 4 zuz. It's now there's a winery in Cape Town that's offering the same thing. Now it's dropped to 1 zuz. Okay, so what happens is he pays the 4 zuzim as restitution for the principal, because that's the principal is assessed at the time that it was stolen. And now that Chardonnay is worth 1 zuz in today's current market prices. So that's the penalty payment, the kefil payment. Okay? Now, it's the same thing if you steal and then slaughter or sell an ox or a sheep, and you become liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. Again, that consists of the principal plus 3 times for the value of the sheep, or 4 times for the value of the goat. The thief pays the principal according to the animal's value at the time of the theft, and the additional fine payment according to the values of the animal at the time he's being sued in court. Okay? So again, ox is worth, let's say, for example, 200 zuz, which he subsequently sold or slaughtered after had maybe decreased in value to 100 zuz. Okay? He then pays the 200 zuz as restitution for the principal, and another 400 zuz, 4 times the ox's subsequent value for the fine, because that's the current value at the time of court. So any knas or kefir payment is done at the court payment date, whereas the original compensation at the time when it was stolen. Okay, so the main purpose here of Rav's ruling is to teach the second half, that the twofold, fourfold, or fivefold payments are paid according to the article's value at the time the thief is sued in court. The principal is paid according to the value at the time of the theft. Okay, now, obviously there's a Mishnah in 93b which states that all robbers pay according to the article's value at the time of the theft. So it should be noted that when Rav says that the principal payment is made according to the stolen article's value at the time of the theft, he only refers to where the thief is actually paying compensation for the principal. But it's not the case when he's returning the stolen article itself. In other words, if that article is still in his possession, he just returns it. This is only a factor if it's no longer extant, or it's broken, or it disappeared, or whatever. Then this comes into play. But if the stolen article itself is in the thief's possession, and it's in the original state, he just returns the article itself as is, regardless of its present worth, and therefore he fulfills his obligation of repaying the principal. And in terms of what the compensatory amount is, that's valued at the time of the court date. Am I making myself 100% clear to you guys? It's not rocket science.
So just repeat it, Damon. My mind's, I'm listening, but it's not, I'm listening, but I'm not listening in a way. Can you just repeat that? Sorry.
Yeah. All right. So, Kevin, all we're saying in a nutshell is if the thief didn't break the article and he's got it somewhere in his garage or in storage, he buried it. I don't know what the hell he's done with it, but wherever he is, he just returns it. So then this argument doesn't come into play. But if he doesn't have that and he has to make financial compensation, the principal is paid at the value at what the article is worth when he stole it. Any compensatory amount, even when if he's got the object and returns it, is done at the value of the article at the time of the court date. So if it's lost value, that's his compensatory. That's not his compensatory amount. That's his penalty amount. That's the kefir. That's at the court date. But the original item is either replaced if he hasn't lost or got rid of it, or it's worked out at the date of theft. But not the kefir, the penalty payment side. Make sense? Right, let's go on. All right, now, the Gemara says, now, we want to know why Rav's, what's his reason for ruling this way? Because the words, the verse states two things. In other words, it's having the word stolen article in live, which is apparently superfluous. You know, I mean, it was demonstrated in the 64th daf. So we want to know, why does the merciful one state live with respect to the stolen article? So Rav expounds, revive the principle, in other words, the stolen article, to be as it was when he stole it. Meaning, the term stolen article denotes specifically that the stolen article itself and not any additional payments for it. So in other words, the principle that's done at the time of theft, he has to make the principle whole. What we learn from this, especially the way Tosfot explains the exposition, is it teaches us two things, Kevin. First thing, it teaches us to revive the principle, not where he's got the article, then he gives it back. But if he doesn't, when he repays the actual compensatory amount, forget about the penalties now. That has to be made whole as it was at the time of the theft, because it could be that he let the animal half starve to death and it's lost its value. So the principle is made at the time of what the animal or article was made at the time of theft. And second, Tosfot teaches us that we revive the principle only, but not the twofold, fourfold, or fivefold payments. And those knasim, those payments, the kefir, is paid at what the stolen article's value is at the time the thief is sued in court. Okay, that's all it is. It's very, very, very straightforward. Okay, now, the Gemara is going to get a couple of challenges. Well, Rav's going to get a couple of challenges. First one, if you remember, was from Rav Sheshes, who said, I say that Rav stated this law when he was drifting into sleep, otherwise he would never have stated it. As we said before, that's a compliment to Rav, because Rav Sheshes admired Rav, and he said he could only have seemed to have come to think this way if he'd have been sleeping, meaning in his sharp, normal state, he never would have. But he didn't agree with Rav Sheshes, because he learns a different brisa, and that brisa seems to contradict Rav, because it says, if a thief stole, this was Kevin's question the other day, by the way, if a thief stole a lean animal, and the thief fattened it, but, you know, we're not talking about feeding it normally the way an animal needs to be fed, because then there's nothing to discuss, because then the animal naturally develops. But we're saying if the thief fed it more than average diet, and it became fattened, in that particular case, okay, he pays the twofold, fourfold, and fivefold payments according to the value when he stole it. So that would apparently seem to contradict Rav, because Rav rules that the fourfold and fivefold payments are assessed according to the value of the stolen article at the time the thief is actually sued in court. This is seeming to say that the thief would pay it at the time that he stole it in terms of its value. So far at this point, the Gemara understands Rav's ruling as pertaining to all cases whether it's an increase or decrease in value, even where the change in value is brought about directly by the thief. That's what Rashi explains. So the Gemara is now going to clear these issues up, right? So the Gemara said it's different from the Bryce's case because the thief here can claim to the owner, I fattened it up for you and you will take the payment. Meaning that the Torah penalizes the thief to pay the twofold, fourfold, or fivefold payment only for the article that he stole. In this case, it can't be considered that he stole the additional fat because it was the thief that unnaturally fed the animal, so he doesn't have to be penalized for it. The original owner's lucky he never starved the animal half to death. But that extra fat thing was the thief's fault because the owner gets the benefit in terms of the principle. But the penalty, the thief isn't punished for looking after the animal by having to pay that percentile of increase due to that additional, nurturing activity that he did for the animal. Okay? The only thing he has to pay is, again, for natural development of the animal. Kevin asked, what if it's a young, sexually underdeveloped animal and now it becomes sexually full, robust, capable of breeding, etc. Yes, the thief would have to pay then because in the owner's hands it would naturally have developed so. Okay, and he would have to pay for price fluctuations if the market deemed that the value of meat had gone up, etc., but not for things pertaining to his own good care. He would obviously either give the thief, the original owner, the animal back, or if he slaughtered or sold it, it's then done at the time of theft, but not at the time where he fattened it up. So we're fair even to the thief. Gavin asked a good question. Why? The thief, or Kevin asked, it technically has lost its rights. I think both of you asked. And I said that at the end of the day, we don't give the thief the death penalty like they used to do at the time of Charles Dickens for pickpocketing, because everybody's entitled to a trial. Look, there's scumbags that are like the mafia that are defended by lawyers and they say everybody's entitled to a free trial. I wouldn't want to be those lawyers in the next world, believe me. They'll be sitting roasting with those mafia guys. They got allowed them to rape, murder, and create mayhem, believe me. But what we're saying is everybody, even the Sanhedrin, look for the innocence on a capital case because everybody is entitled to a fair and just defense. The thief that stole has to make restitution, but not to an extent that would be to his detriment. That's not part of, that hasn't got a factual basis. And one of the reasons I mentioned, guys, it was just my own thinking, I might be wrong, is if the thief doesn't have enough money, he could land up in servitude to another Jew for 7 years. Be separated from his wife. That's not a joke. That's a very, very serious thing. So we got to play fair. Believe me, the amount of penalty is paying double, fourfold, or fivefold. He'll never do it again. Believe it. I mean, that's enough of a deterrent. Okay. So now we're learning further. So we're learning a case where so there's another challenge to Rabbah. It says, come learn a proof from the following. Brisa, if a thief stole a fat animal, this is also Kevin's question, and he caused it to become lean. Okay. In other words, how does an animal become lean? There's one of three ways. The primary way is you stress the animal out. You stress it by starving it, beating it, or overworking it. All those things would cause an animal to lose weight, guaranteed. Doesn't have to be only depriving it of food. If its physical exertion is more than its consumption, it will lose weight. If there's disease or lack of care or neglect, it'll lose weight. It's not fed enough, it will lose weight. So fat animal becomes lean. He pays the twofold, fourfold, or fivefold payment according to its value when he stole it. Okay? And that would contradict Rav, because Rav said that's determined at the date, at the court date, not when he stole it. Okay? So it would seem to contradict Rav, but it's not, because any of you guys can think of a logical answer, which I'm going to bring in. That logical answer is, why should the original owner deserve to lose money when the thief was negligent with the animal? And at that case, it would be to the original owner's detriment. Rav is fair. It depends situation in what's going wrong. Okay? So, the Gemara answers there to it is different. Because we can say to the owner, what difference does it make to me whether he killed the animal entirely or whether he killed it halfway? Okay? So what we say is the act of slaughter, in other words, which makes him liable to pay the fourfold or fivefold payment, is considered to have begun from the moment he weakened the animal, according to Rashi. That's when the deterioration started. Okay? So it's at that point that we would work it out. So because the original owner doesn't have to lose out as a result. Does that make sense? Now, obviously, Tosfot has one specific issue, because the fourfold and fivefold payment would only generally occur when he kills the animal shechset in a kosher way, with an act of ritual slaughter. Otherwise, he's got to find a non-Jewish market for it. So he'd have to give it a proper shchita. So that's at that point where it's worked out. Not when he's starting, bless you, not when he's starting to let it deteriorate, or not if he kills it through some other means. So even if you kill the animal, that would be considered the start of killing it. Gab, are you with me? I know you sneezed, but are you with me now?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay, so listen, Tosfot's got an issue. He's saying you can't really work it out in that way, because if you want to work it out at the point where the animal started to deteriorate, that's not the case of actual ritual slaughter. And whoever that Jew, in order to get his proper value with, wouldn't sell it to a non-Jew. He might not get paid. Jews stuck with Jews. You'd sell it within the market. So, in actual fact, wandering off, Gav.
Yeah, don't worry. Sorry. Just carry on. I'm listening then.
All right. Let me wait for you, but it's just disconcerting when people get up and move and whatever. So basically, Tosfot is saying you can't do that. You can't work it out at the point where it weakens the animal, because that's not a proper shchita. And you can only work it out from the point where the shchita began if you sold the animal or slaughtered it. So it's not at the time where you weakened it that you stole it. It has to be at the time where the shchita takes place. You can work it out from that point. Okay. So they kind of, the Gemara is working out a way where Tosfot and Rashi are on the same page. And I'll show you how they do it. Is they kind of say that at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It's just what really matters is how the original owner lost out. In other words, he can't be penalized. If the thief fattened the animal, it's not the thief that should be penalized. If the thief caused the deterioration, the original owner of the animal shouldn't be penalized either. So it's that point at which it started to deteriorate due to the thief's act, or increased due to the thief's act, that's taken into account. However, if it's price fluctuations or the animal naturally increased in value, that's not as a result of the thief's negligence or overindulgence in feeding. And therefore, that gets worked out, the principle at the time at which it was stolen, and the penalty at the time of the sued date in court. That makes absolute sense, guys. Does that make sense? So in other words, the Gemara says, when does Rav say that the twofold, fourfold, and fivefold payment are paid according to the stolen article's value at the time that the thief is sued in court? Again, twofold, fourfold, fivefold are paid according to the stolen article's value at the time the thief is sued in court. It's regard to where the stolen article undergoes a change in value through a rise or fall in price, and he says it. Meaning, it's natural development of the animal or a price fluctuation in the market, but not due to the thief's neglect or intervention. So those are the rules. Having established that Rav refers to where the stolen article's value changed due to price fluctuation, the Gemara seeks now a more precise understanding of the circumstances. Why? Because it's easy to see where the animal naturally developed, but as far as the price fluctuation, it needs a little bit more in-depth analysis. Okay. So basically, how is it? In other words, the Gemara is saying, for what situation did Rav issue his ruling? If you say it's where it was originally when the article was stolen, okay, it was worth 1 zuz. And in the end, it was worth 4 zuzim. Okay, so when we say in the end, when he eventually stole or when he sold the animal or he slaughtered it. So again, let's look at timeline. Gus steals Kevin an ox, right? So he pays the principal at the time where he stole it, but the penalty only pays when it's the court date. But in terms of the court date could be months after. So it's saying, look, there in terms of price fluctuation, it has to be worked out at the point where he either sold it or slaughtered it. It doesn't mean at the court date where they heard the trial. It means at the point where the animal was no longer in the thief's possession. Kevin, you're falling asleep. Either when the animal was slaughtered or he sold it to a third party. Okay, so we're saying, okay, so initially when he stole it, it was worth 1 zuz. When he eventually slaughtered or sold it, it was worth 4 zuzim. Okay, so which means that the animal either grew up, as Kevin said, or in this particular case, it seems that it's an issue of that the value of meat was worth more, because it's discussing this in context of a price fluctuation, right? In this case, Rav ruled that he pays the principal according to the stolen article's value when he stole it. That's what we discussed. Shall we say then that the ruling of Rav disputes the ruling of Rabbah? For Rabbah said, one who stole a keg of wine from another, that originally, in other words, when he stole it, was worth a zuz, and in the end, when he destroyed it, it was worth 4 zuzim. So we learn here, if he destroyed it actively, he broke the keg or drank its wine, for example, he pays the 4 zuzim. In other words, its value at the time of destruction. If the keg broke by itself, he pays only a zuz its value at the time of the theft. Does that make sense? Now there's an extra, Gab, I'm going to mute you a second because there's a lot of noise, I think, coming from your side because you're not on your laptop yet. Okay, sorry, but all right. So again, let's just determine the circumstance. We're saying here that Rabbah is saying, look, keg of wine is worth originally a zuz. In the end, they're having the court date, and in the court date, it's acknowledged that maybe 6 months later it was destroyed, but at the time that it was destroyed, that it's now worth 4 zuzim because there's no longer local Cape Town produce of wine. There's been a shortage and it's only available import from California. So now the price fluctuation went up. So we were saying that if the thief broke it, destroyed it actively, in other words, he physically destroyed it or he drank its contents, he's responsible. So now he's got to pay that price fluctuation of the 4 zuz. But say he put it on the shelf, and at that point witnesses are called in the court and say there was a big storm outside and it broke the house that the thief was in and it broke the keg of wine, etc. Then the thief has to only pay the 1 zuz is what he was worth, what the keg was worth at the point that he stole it. Okay, that's fairly clear. Now the reason being is, you see, the Gemara determines it in a slightly different way. It gives a distinction as follows, right? It's in the 93rd mission of Bava Kamma. So the rule is that a thief is liable to pay only for the stolen article's value at the time of the theft. And that applies only when the stolen article is no longer in existence. But if it still exists, the article still belongs to the original owner, and the thief just returns the article itself. It doesn't matter about the present value. Okay? Now, in this particular case, we're saying it's different because the keg broke. So what we have to determine is, why did it break? As a result of negligence or just an unavoidable accident? So what's happening if it's negligence or if it was drunk, the point of robbery reoccurs again, at which it's no longer in existence. That's the timeline of the robbery. But when the Gemara uses the term that it was robbed twice, and the real timeline is when the article was destroyed, is not totally accurate. And in fact, the Nesivos HaMishpat uses a better term. It says the first time he stole it, okay, but if he damaged it, the reason he's paying the 4 zuzim is because there's nezek, there's mazik, there's actual damage. So when he damages it, you're replacing what you've damaged. Remember the law of Ma'aveh. So we have Haveh, which is fine, Ma'aveh is man. Whenever Kevin man destroys something, he makes full payment. So in other words, he stole it. At that point, he was only eligible for the principal. In this particular case, oh, by the way, you must know that the actual compensatory amount is the principal, but the penalty he still pays at the time that it was destroyed. But the principal he pays at the time of theft. In this particular case, Rabbah is saying no. The principal is actually paid at the point at which it was broken, damaged, because he's paying for damage. He's paying for that's what he's paying for. So so it's not a case of theft anymore; it's a case of damage, and that's why the damaged portion he has to pay back at the forces at the high evaluated rate of the current value at where it was destroyed, and he would have to pay the penalty at the time of destruction as well. So we're saying, to put it in a nutshell, is that are we finding that Rav is disagreeing with Rabbah? Because again, Rav is saying principal is paid at the time it was stolen, and the penalty is paid at the time when he's sued in court for when the actual damage occurs. You know, at the point where if it was a live animal, he sold it or slaughtered it, or the article at the time when it got damaged, or at the time when there's a court date, if it's not in existence anymore. Fine. So what we also find out is the Gemara says, no, in fact, they don't argue, because it would seem that they do, because Rabbah is saying that it's done at the time when there's actual destructive damage, not if it's an unavoidable accident, and not at the time of theft. So the Gemara is saying that they don't necessarily disagree. In fact, they do agree. Why? Because when did Rav state his ruling? In other words, that even when he slaughters or steals the stolen animal, he pays the principal according to the value at the time of the theft. But in a case where, for example, originally it was worth 4 zuzim, and in the end it was worth 1 zuz, in such cases he pays the principal according to the stolen article's value when he stole it, and he pays the 2-fold, 4-fold, or 5-fold payment according to the stolen article's value at the time that he sued in court. In other words, for example, if he stole an ox worth 4 zuzim, and he slaughtered it when its value had decreased to 1 zuz, he pays 5 times the ox's value. So the principal portion is valued at 4 zuz, and each of the additional 4 payments are valued at 1 zuz. So he pays 4 zuzim for the principal restitution, and an additional 4 zuzim for the fine when he slaughtered the stolen ox. Okay? So, I tell you what we're going to do. Because why is it the same? Because if you look at Rabbah's opinion, he said if you stole a keg of wine from another that originally was worth a zuz, and in the end it's worth 4 zuzim, you pay the 4 zuz and 4 zuz. So we're saying in this particular case, you could still pay the 4 zuz and 4 zuz according to Rav, because it's again 4 zuz at the time that it was stolen, and 4 zuz, which is the 4-fold payment for that ox. So it would match Rabbah, but the reasoning is different. That's what we're saying. So the payment would be the same, but the actual reasoning would be different. So we got to look at reasoning, not just that the payments match. All right, I think we should end tonight. Everybody's exhausted. Was the shear beneficial? Just come on for 1 minute, Arthur, if you can.